The words on the page seemed to rearrange themselves, swimming and reforming into shapes that made no sense. Then they locked into place and the air left my lungs as though someone had cinched my corset 3 sizes too tight. Asylum. Incompetent. Full control of assets. My fingers had gone to ice. The note trembled in my grip, but I couldn't feel the paper anymore. I could only feel the sudden, terrible understanding spreading through my chest like frost across a window pane. 3 physicians, already prepared to sign, the trust my mother had created to protect me, the only thing standing between me and destitution, would become the very instrument of my destruction. I was to be married in less than an hour, and my husband intended to lock me away forever. My name is Amelia. I'm 27 and the daughter of a viscount. This is the story of how I burned down the cage they built for me and walked through the ashes into my own life. Helen Crawford, my former governess and the only person in Blackwood Manor who had ever truly seen me, stood in the doorway of my dressing room. Her weathered face had gone the color of chalk. "I overheard them last night," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the distant sounds of wedding preparations. "Lord Norwood and your uncle, in the study. They didn't know I was in the corridor." I read the note again, then a third time. Each reading made it more real, more monstrous. My Uncle Bernard had sold me like livestock to settle his gambling debts. And the buyer, Lord Frederick Norwood, a man I'd met exactly twice, planned to dispose of me the moment the ink dried on our marriage certificate. "The trust," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "He wants Mother's trust." £30,000, Helen confirmed. "Once you're married, control transfers to your husband, and once you're declared incompetent." She didn't need to finish. I understood perfectly. Frederick Norwood would have everything, my inheritance, my freedom, and eventually, when I became inconvenient, my life. I thought of his previous wives then, both dead within 2 years of their weddings, the whispers that had never quite risen to accusations, the convenient illnesses, the altered wills. My wedding gown hung behind me, ivory silk and Brussels lace, waiting to become my shroud. "I have to run." The words came out before I'd fully formed the thought. Now. Immediately. Helen was already moving toward the wardrobe. "I've prepared a traveling dress, simple enough to draw no attention." She pulled out a modest wool garment in dark blue. "The household is in chaos with the preparations. If we're quick, if we're clever." Where would I even go? I was already shedding the elaborate dressing gown, my fingers fumbling with buttons. "Uncle Bernard is my legal guardian until I marry or turn 30. Any respectable family would return me within the day, then go where they cannot easily follow. London, the northern counties." Helen helped me into the plain dress, her movements efficient despite her trembling hands. "You have 3 years, my lady. 3 years until the trust releases to you regardless of marriage. You need only survive." Survive. Such a small word for such an impossible task, but as I fastened the buttons at my wrists, I felt something I hadn't experienced in the 18 months since my parents' deaths. Hope. Dangerous, foolish hope, flickering to life in my chest. Helen pressed a small purse into my hands. "My savings, 30 years of service. It's not much, but it will see you through a few weeks if you're careful." Tears blurred my vision. "I cannot take this." "You can and you will." Her voice cracked. "Your mother was kind to me when others were not. I watched you grow from a child into a woman of intelligence and courage. I will not stand by and see you destroyed." The sound of carriages on the gravel drive below sent us both to the window. Guests. Arriving early, their carriages forming a procession of witnesses to a marriage that would never happen. "The eastern gate," Helen said quickly. "It leads to the main road toward Kent. I'll create a distraction. Go, now." I grasped her hands one final time. "If Uncle Bernard suspects you helped me, let me worry about that. Just go, child. Go and don't look back." We moved through the servants' corridors, Helen leading with the confidence of someone who had walked these passages for 3 decades. The household buzzed with activity. Maids carrying flowers, footmen polishing silver, cooks shouting orders for the wedding breakfast. No one spared a glance for two women in plain dress hurrying toward the rear entrance. At the kitchen door, Helen suddenly swayed, pressing her hand to her forehead with a theatrical gasp. "The heat," she announced loudly. "I feel faint." Two maids rushed to her aid. In the commotion of their concern, I slipped through the door and into the morning air. Every instinct screamed at me to run. Instead, I walked, quickly but not frantically, across the kitchen garden through the gap in the hedge my sisters and I had used as children. The memory struck me with unexpected force. My sisters, both married now, settled in their own homes, too occupied with their own lives to notice their eldest sister's distress. The eastern gate was mercifully unlocked. Beyond it stretched the road, dusty and quiet in the morning light. I glanced back once at the manor, at the only home I had ever known, and then I ran. My boots weren't made for running. Within minutes, my breath came in gasps, my legs burning with effort. Behind me, I heard shouting. They'd discovered my absence faster than anticipated. The wedding was meant to begin in less than an hour. My uncle would be furious. Norwood would be murderous. The road curved ahead, bordered by ancient oak trees whose branches created a canopy of green. I rounded the bend and nearly sobbed with relief. A carriage stood motionless on the roadside, its door bearing a coat of arms I recognized instantly, the Duke of Thornfield. I'd never met the man, but everyone in Surrey knew his crest. The ducal estate lay some 30 miles distant in Kent. Two men worked at the front wheel. One of the horses had lost a shoe, and the coachman was examining the hoof, while a younger man held the reins. Neither looked in my direction. The carriage door stood slightly ajar. The shouts behind me grew louder. Male voices now, not just servants. They were pursuing me on horseback. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I simply moved, darting to the carriage and pulling myself up the steps. The interior smelled of leather and sandalwood, something masculine and expensive. Rich burgundy upholstery, polished brass fixtures, a traveling blanket folded neatly on one seat. I crawled beneath the opposite bench, pulling the blanket down to conceal myself, making my body as small as possible in the narrow space. The fine dust of the floor covering filled my nose. My dress caught on something, tearing slightly, but I hardly noticed. "Nearly done, Your Grace," I heard the coachman call. "Just needs the new shoe fitted proper." "Take your time, Davis," came a deep voice from somewhere outside. "I am in no particular hurry." The Duke himself. I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling the sound of my ragged breathing. Through a gap in the blanket, I could see a sliver of the road. 3 riders thundered past, my uncle's stablemaster and 2 footmen. They didn't slow, didn't glance at the stopped carriage, assuming I must have continued ahead on foot. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. My muscles cramped in the confined space. My heart gradually slowed its frantic pace, though fear still coiled in my stomach. What had I done? Hidden myself in a duke's private carriage like a common thief. If discovered, I would be arrested, returned to my uncle in chains. But what choice had I possessed? "All set, Your Grace," the coachman called finally. The carriage shifted as someone climbed aboard. Not into the passenger compartment, thank God, but up to the driver's box. The vehicle lurched into motion, wheels crunching on gravel, and I closed my eyes, offering a desperate prayer to any power that might be listening. The journey became a blur of discomfort and terror. The carriage swayed and bumped over uneven roads. Twice they slowed for other vehicles to pass. Once they stopped entirely, and I heard the Duke's voice again, though I couldn't make out the words. My legs went numb. My back ached. Dust and fear made my throat raw. When the carriage finally rolled to a stop, and I heard the sounds of an inn yard, horses being led away, voices calling for ostlers and stable boys, I faced a new dilemma. Should I reveal myself? Throw myself on the Duke's mercy? But what mercy could I expect from a man whose carriage I'd invaded? What if he knew my uncle? What if he simply returned me, as any man of honor would? The decision was made for me when I heard footsteps approaching, heard the carriage door open. I pressed myself deeper into my hiding place, hardly daring to breathe. The door closed again. More footsteps moving away. I was alone. For now. Slowly, painfully, I extracted myself from beneath the seat. Through the window, I could see the busy courtyard of a substantial coaching inn. The sign read, "The Rose and Crown." I had no idea where we were, how far we'd traveled from Blackwood Manor. My body screamed for me to flee into the crowd, to disappear among the travelers and merchants. But I had no money save what Helen had given me, and that would not last long. I had no connections, no one to turn to. And somewhere behind us, my uncle and Lord Norwood were searching. The Duke's voice drifted through the window, speaking with someone about fresh horses and a meal. I made my choice. I would hide here as long as possible, until the carriage reached wherever it was going. Perhaps then, in a larger town or city, I would have better prospects of disappearing. I crawled back into my hiding place, pulling the blanket over myself once more, and prepared for the remainder of the journey. Helen's worried face haunted my thoughts. By now, the wedding would have been canceled. The guests turned away. My uncle would be interrogating the staff, offering rewards for information. And Helen, dear Helen, who had risked everything to help me. What would become of her? Tears slipped down my cheeks, but I made no sound. I had chosen this path. There was no turning back now. All I could do was hope that wherever this carriage was taking me, it would be far enough from Surrey, far enough from Lord Frederick Norwood and his cruel plans, to give me a chance at something resembling freedom. The carriage lurched back into motion, and Lady Amelia Blackwood, who should have been married by now, who should have been dancing at her own wedding breakfast, disappeared into the unknown. The afternoon light was beginning to fade when James Ashworth, Duke of Thornfield, emerged from the Rose and Crown. His meal concluded and his correspondence reviewed. The inn had proven adequate, as such establishments went, though he looked forward to reaching his own estate before nightfall. The business in London had been tedious. All contracts and solicitors and endless discussions of land rights. He preferred the relative simplicity of Thornfield Hall, where his authority was absolute and his solitude assured. Davis, his coachman of 15 years, had the fresh horses harnessed and ready. James approached the carriage, nodding his approval at the efficiency. As he reached for the door handle, something caught his eye. The traveling blanket, which he distinctly remembered folding and placing on the far seat that morning, was now draped haphazardly over the edge of the opposite bench. He paused, his hand still on the brass handle. The inn-yard bustled with activity around him, merchants haggling, horses being led to stalls, a woman scolding a child for running too near the wheels of a mail coach. Yet James's attention had narrowed to that single detail. The blanket. He was a man of precise habits. He had not touched that blanket since departing London. With deliberate care, he opened the carriage door and stepped inside. The interior appeared undisturbed at first glance. The leather seats gleamed with their usual polish. His travel case remained secure in its place. But the blanket drew his eye again, its position all wrong. James reached down and grasped the edge of the wool fabric. As he lifted it, he found himself staring into a pair of terrified green eyes. The young woman who had been hiding beneath his seat let out a small gasp, scrambling backward against the far wall of the carriage. She was covered in dust, her dark hair escaping from what had once been a neat arrangement, her dress rumpled and torn at one sleeve. Dirt smudged her cheek and forehead. But even in her disheveled state, even with fear radiating from every line of her body, James could see she was no common traveler. "Please," she whispered, "please don't send me back." James remained motionless in the doorway, his mind rapidly assessing the situation. A young woman, clearly of gentle birth despite her current state, hiding in his carriage, fleeing from something, or someone. His first instinct was to summon the innkeeper, to hand this matter over to the local authorities. But something in her eyes stopped him. Not just fear, though that was certainly present. Desperation. The look of a creature cornered with no escape. "Davis," he called without turning his head, "take a turn around the yard. Ensure all is secure for our departure." "Yes, Your Grace." The sound of boots moved away. James climbed fully into the carriage and pulled the door closed behind him. The woman pressed herself further into the corner, as though she might disappear into the upholstery if she tried hard enough. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice level and calm, "but you will explain how you came to be concealed in my carriage." She swallowed hard, her hands twisting in her lap. James noted those hands, slender and pale, the fingers long and elegant, not the hands of a servant or laborer. Whatever story she was about to tell him, it would contain lies. "I was fleeing," she said finally, "from my employer. He's a cruel man. He threatened me when I refused his advances. I saw your carriage stopped on the road and I hid. I'm sorry. I meant no harm. If you would simply let me out here, I'll trouble you no further." "Your employer," James repeated, settling into the seat opposite her. "What manner of household did you serve?" "I was a companion," she said quickly, too quickly, "to an elderly lady in Surrey. But when she passed, her son inherited the estate, and he became improper in his attentions." James studied her face. She met his gaze directly, which spoke of either courage or good training. Her accent was refined, her vocabulary that of an educated woman. Yet she claimed to be a paid companion, a position usually filled by impoverished gentlewomen of middling background. "A companion," he said, "yet your dress, though travel-worn, is of fine quality. That wool is not inexpensive, and those are not the boots of a woman who must work for her bread." She flushed, her fingers stilling their anxious movement. "They were gifts from my late mistress. She was kind to me." "I see." James leaned back slightly, allowing her more space. "What is your name?" She hesitated. He could see her mind working, deciding how much truth to risk. "Amelia," she said at last. "Miss Amelia of Surrey, who was a companion to a kind elderly lady who gifted her expensive clothing." James's tone was dry. "You'll forgive me if I find your tale somewhat lacking in credibility." Tears gathered in her eyes, though she blinked them back with determination. "I'm telling you the truth. Perhaps not all of it, but what I've said is not a lie. I had to flee. I had no choice. If you return me to Surrey, I will be destroyed." The raw honesty in that final statement gave James pause. Whatever her full story might be, he believed that much. She was genuinely afraid, not of him, at least not primarily, but of something or someone behind her. "I don't make a habit of destroying young women," he said, "nor do I make a habit of harboring runaways in my carriage. You've placed me in an awkward position, Miss Amelia." "I know." Her voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry, truly. I was desperate. I thought I could hide until we reached a town somewhere larger where I might disappear." James considered his options. He could deposit her here at the inn, wash his hands of the matter entirely. It would be the sensible course. Whatever trouble she'd embroiled herself in was not his concern. Yet something about her bearing, the way she held herself despite her obvious terror, reminded him of someone. His mother, perhaps, in her final years, when his father's cruelty had stripped away everything but her dignity. "I'm traveling to Thornfield Hall in Kent," he said finally. "It's my estate. I'll take you as far as the next substantial town, where you may arrange for proper transportation to wherever you wish to go. In the meantime, you will sit on that seat properly visible, and you will not make any sudden movements that might alarm my coachman. Is that understood?" Relief flooded her features. "Yes, thank you, Your Grace, I assume." "Indeed." He rapped on the ceiling, signaling Davis. The carriage lurched into motion moments later. They traveled in silence for several miles. James observed her covertly, noting details. The way she held her hands folded neatly despite their trembling, the straightness of her spine even in exhaustion, the quality of her speech when she'd spoken. Everything about her suggested good breeding, careful education, the kind of upbringing reserved for daughters of the gentry at minimum. "Are you hungry?" he asked eventually, producing a small package from his travel case. The inn provided bread and cheese for the journey. She stared at the offered food as though it might vanish if she reached for it. "I haven't eaten since last night," she admitted quietly. "Then eat." He handed her the package along with a clean handkerchief. "Though you might wish to wipe your face first. You've collected half the road dust in Surrey on your cheek." A ghost of a smile crossed her face as she accepted the handkerchief. "I must look frightful." "You look like a woman who has been hiding beneath a carriage seat for the better part of a day," James replied. "Which is to say, yes, frightful." She laughed then, a small surprised sound that transformed her features. Cleaned of dust and relaxed from immediate fear, she was quite lovely, not in the conventional way of debutantes and society beauties, but with an intelligence in her eyes and a strength in her jaw that suggested character. As she ate the bread and cheese with careful, small bites, James found himself curious, despite his better judgment. "You mentioned Surrey. What part?" She hesitated mid-bite. "Near Guildford," she said finally. "Why do you ask?" "I have holdings in that region. I wondered if we might have mutual acquaintances." Her face paled slightly. "I don't move in elevated circles, Your Grace. A paid companion has little social standing." "Yet you speak French," James observed, switching to that language. "Your accent is excellent. Where did you learn?" She froze, caught. After a moment, she replied in equally fluent French. "My mistress believed in education. She employed a tutor." How generous of her. James switched back to English. To employ a French tutor for her companion. Most unusual. Amelia set down the remainder of the bread. Her appetite apparently fled. "You don't believe me." "I believe you're in trouble," James said. "I believe you're fleeing from something. Or someone. I believe you're frightened. But I don't believe you were a paid companion, Miss Amelia. The question is whether your deception matters to me." She met his gaze then. Really met it. And he saw something fierce beneath the fear. "It shouldn't matter to you at all. You'll leave me in the next town. I'll disappear and you'll forget you ever saw me. My troubles need not become yours." A sensible observation, James agreed. But even as he spoke, he knew he would not simply abandon her. Whether from curiosity, chivalry, or simple human decency, he had involved himself the moment he'd pulled back that blanket. The sun set as they traveled, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Amelia dozed fitfully in her corner, exhaustion finally claiming her despite her obvious attempts to remain alert. James watched her sleep and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. They reached Thornfield Hall as twilight deepened into true darkness. The estate rose before them, its stone walls and tall windows gleaming with lamplight. Home. James felt the familiar easing of tension that always came when he passed through his gates. Amelia woke as the carriage slowed, blinking in confusion before memory returned. She looked out at the imposing structure of the hall with wide eyes. "This is where you live?" "It is." James opened the door as a footman rushed forward. "Come, I'll have my housekeeper prepare a room for you." "Your Grace, I cannot impose." But he cut her off with a raised hand. "You've already imposed considerably, Miss Amelia. A night's shelter and a proper meal will allow you to regain your strength. We can discuss your onward journey in the morning." She had little choice but to accept. James led her into the grand entrance hall, where Mrs. Thornberry, his housekeeper of 20 years, awaited with her usual impeccable timing. "Mrs. Thornberry, we have an unexpected guest. Please prepare the blue room and see that Miss Amelia has everything she requires. Some of the late Duchess's clothing may fit her." If Mrs. Thornberry was surprised by the arrival of a disheveled young woman with no luggage, she gave no sign of it. "Of course, Your Grace." "Miss, if you'll follow me." Amelia hesitated, looking back at James with an expression he couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with apprehension, perhaps. "Thank you," she said softly, "for your kindness." "Save your thanks until morning," James replied. "We have matters to discuss." He watched her follow Mrs. Thornberry up the grand staircase, noting how her steps slowed as exhaustion pulled at her. Whatever story she was hiding, whatever circumstances had driven her to such desperate measures, he would discover the truth. But tonight, he would allow her to rest. In his study later, with a glass of brandy warming in his hand, James stared into the fire and thought of green eyes filled with terror and determination. Thought of elegant hands that had never known labor. Thought of a woman who spoke fluent French and held herself like nobility but claimed to be a servant. He thought, too, of the instinct that had made him help her rather than turn her over to the authorities. The same instinct that whispered she would bring nothing but complication into his orderly life. For once, James Ashworth chose not to listen to common sense. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight, he had offered sanctuary to a stranger, and he found he did not regret it. The blue room in which I woke possessed more luxury than I had known even at Blackwood Manor. Morning sunlight streamed through tall windows draped in silk, illuminating furniture of polished mahogany and walls papered in delicate patterns of cream and gold. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, I forgot where I was. Then memory returned in a rush. The flight, the carriage, the Duke. I sat up slowly, noting the clean nightgown someone had laid out, the washing basin with fresh water, the tray of breakfast foods that had been delivered while I slept. My own dress had been taken away, replaced by a simple but elegant day dress in soft gray. The late Duchess's clothing, Mrs. Thornberry had said. I ran my fingers over the fine fabric and wondered what manner of woman the previous Duchess of Thornfield had been. A soft knock at the door announced the housekeeper herself. "Good morning, miss. I trust you slept well?" "Very well, thank you." I stood, suddenly conscious of my uncertain position. "I should speak with the Duke. I've imposed long enough on his hospitality." "His Grace is in the library, miss, if you would follow me." The library proved to be a magnificent room, 2 stories tall, with shelves reaching toward a painted ceiling. Books lined every wall, their leather spines creating a tapestry of colors. The Duke stood by one of the tall windows, a letter in his hand, but he turned as Mrs. Thornberry announced me. "Miss Amelia, I trust you're recovered from yesterday's ordeal?" "I am, Your Grace, and I owe you my deepest gratitude for your kindness." I hesitated, then continued. "I won't trouble you further. If you could direct me to the nearest coaching inn, I'll arrange my onward journey." He studied me for a long moment. "And where do you intend to go?" "North," I said vaguely. "I have distant connections who may provide assistance." "More deceptions?" His voice held no anger, merely observation. "You have no connections, do you? No money beyond what little you carry. No plan beyond running as far from Surrey as possible." The accuracy of his assessment stung. "That's my concern, not yours." "Perhaps." He set down the letter and moved to a nearby desk. "However, I find myself curious. 3 days, Miss Amelia. Grant me 3 days to satisfy my curiosity, and in return, I'll provide you with funds sufficient to establish yourself wherever you choose to go." I stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I suspect you're running from something genuinely dangerous, and I don't make a habit of sending young women into peril without resources." He gestured to the shelves around them. "In the meantime, I have correspondence that requires organization. My late wife's papers, specifically. They're in French and Latin, and my own knowledge of those languages is adequate, but not fluent. If you truly were a companion, you must have some skill at such tasks. It was a test, I realized. He was offering me a way to remain while he investigated my story. "I can read both French and Latin," I said carefully. My education was thorough. "Then we have an arrangement." He indicated a smaller desk near the window. "The papers are there. Sort them by date and subject. I'll be working at my own desk should you require assistance." The next 3 days fell into an unexpected pattern. Each morning I arrived in the library to find new stacks of correspondence waiting. I worked methodically, my translations careful and precise. The Duke, James, though I dared not think of him so informally, maintained his own work at the larger desk, though I often felt his gaze upon me. We spoke little at first, our exchanges limited to necessary questions about the documents. But gradually, in the quiet hours of afternoon when the household settled into its routines, conversation began to flow more naturally. "Your wife collected quite extensive correspondence," I observed on the second day, setting aside a particularly lengthy letter from a Parisian acquaintance. "Caroline had friends across Europe," James replied. "She was more social than I am. She found Thornfield Hall rather isolating, I think, though she never complained directly." Something in his tone made me look up. "You miss her." "I miss the idea of what we might have become." He set down his pen, his expression distant. "Ours was an arranged marriage. Our families had been negotiating the match since we were children. We were cordial to one another, respectful, but we never achieved what one might call affection. She died of a fever 4 years ago, and I regret that we didn't have more time to see if something deeper might have developed." The honesty surprised me. I'm sorry for your loss. And I for yours. You mentioned deceased parents yesterday. My hand stilled on the papers before me. My father was Viscount Blackwood. He died 2 years ago. My mother, some months before him. They were devoted to one another. When she passed, I think he simply lost the will to continue. It was the truth, or at least part of it. And speaking it aloud brought unexpected relief. For months, I had carried my grief in silence, my uncle viewing any display of emotion as unseemly weakness. That must have been difficult, James said quietly, to lose both parents so close together. It was the loneliness that proved hardest. I admitted more than I intended. My sisters married young and well. They have their own households now, their own concerns. I became little more than an obligation to my uncle, a ward to be dealt with as expediently as possible. I had said too much. James's attention sharpened immediately. Your uncle? Would that be Lord Bernard Blackwood? My breath caught. You know him? I know of him. He has a reputation for gaming, though we don't move in the same circles. James rose from his desk and crossed to stand before me. What else haven't you told me, Miss Amelia? Or should I say, Lady Amelia Blackwood? The game was over. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he regarded me with both understanding and concern. How did you know? Your accent, your bearing, the quality of your education, but primarily this. He picked up one of the letters I'd been translating. You read this correspondence from Caroline's cousin with perfect comprehension of nuances that would elude most translators. That level of education is reserved for daughters of the nobility. I stood, unable to remain seated under his scrutiny. Very well. Yes, I'm Amelia Blackwood, daughter of the late Viscount. Are you satisfied? Far from it. Why did Lord Blackwood arrange a marriage for you to flee from? Most guardians consider suitable matches a blessing, not a burden to escape. The concern in his voice, the genuine desire to understand rather than condemn, broke through the walls I'd built around my fear. Because Lord Norwood promised to solve my uncle's financial difficulties in exchange for my hand, and because, once we were married, Norwood planned to have me declared incompetent and confined to an asylum so he might control my mother's inheritance. I watched James's expression darken as I explained everything. What Helen had overheard, the trust that should have protected me, the physicians already prepared to sign false documents. Helen, I said, my voice breaking slightly. She was my governess, the only person in that house who cared for my welfare. She helped me escape, created a distraction so I might flee, but my uncle will have questioned her if he suspects she aided me. I couldn't finish. I'll find her, James said quietly. I have resources, connections. If she can be helped, I'll see to it. Why would you do that? You owe me nothing. Consider it payment for the truth. His gray eyes held mine. You've been carrying this alone for too long, Amelia. Let me help. James departed for London before dawn 3 days later, informing only Mrs. Thornberry of his true purpose. To the rest of the household, he claimed business with his solicitors, common enough to raise no suspicion. I watched his carriage disappear down the drive from the library window, anxiety knotting my stomach despite his assurances. He returned 4 days later with documents that confirmed everything I'd told him and revealed horrors I hadn't known. Norwood's first 2 wives, he said, spreading papers across his study desk, both dead within 2 years of their weddings. Both had recently changed their wills in his favor. A former servant witnessed him adding powder to his second wife's tea in the weeks before her death. I stared at the evidence. Financial records. Letters in Norwood's own hand to a physician named Dr. Horace Bentley, discussing arrangements for a patient requiring permanent discretion. James's investigators had seized these letters from a solicitor's office after obtaining a magistrate's order. He's killed before, I whispered. He would have killed me. Yes, I believe he would have. James's jaw was tight. There's more. I found Helen. She'd been dismissed without reference, but she's safe now, staying with her sister in Cheapside. I've offered her a position here at Thornfield. Relief made me dizzy. She's safe. Thank God. Amelia? James's voice shifted, became careful. Your uncle is still your legal guardian. He can compel your return, unless what? Unless you're married to someone else. The words hung between us. I understood immediately what he was offering and what it would cost him. You can't mean. A marriage of convenience and protection. Once you're wed to me, your uncle's guardianship ends. Norwood's claims become invalid. The trust transfers according to its terms, to you as a married woman, with all the protections that entails. You would sacrifice your freedom, your future. For a woman you've known barely 2 weeks. I had no intention of marrying again regardless. His voice was matter of fact. My first marriage was cordial but cold. But a partnership? A genuine alliance with a woman whose mind I respect and whose situation I can remedy? That has a certain logic. Logic. Such a cold word for such an extraordinary offer. But I thought of Norwood's dead wives. I thought of the asylum in Yorkshire. I thought of Helen's terrified face as she pressed that note into my hands. Yes, I said, I accept. We married 3 days later in Thornfield's private chapel. Helen, whom James had brought from London, stood as witness, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The ceremony was brief, the kiss that sealed it barely more than a brush of lips. But when James slipped the gold band onto my finger, something shifted in my chest. Not love, not yet, but the first foundation of safety, the beginning of trust. My uncle's furious letter arrived that afternoon. James responded with 3 sentences and a warning that any further contact would be met with legal action. But I knew it wasn't over. Norwood wasn't the type of man to simply accept defeat. He'll find another way, I told James that evening. He's too desperate, too dangerous. Then we need to be more dangerous. James's expression was grim. We have evidence of his intentions toward you. We have suspicious circumstances around his previous wives. What we need is proof solid enough to bring criminal charges. How do we get that? Carefully. He met my eyes. And you're going to help me. This is your fight, Amelia. You should be the one to end it. Something fierce kindled in my chest at his words. Not gratitude this time. Something that felt like reclaiming myself. Tell me what to do. The investigation took 3 weeks. James had connections. Solicitors, investigators, men who could ask questions without raising suspicion. But I wasn't content to simply wait for reports. I wrote to my sisters through trusted intermediaries, using unmarked correspondence that could not be traced back to Thornfield, carefully extracting information about Norwood's activities and reputation. I interviewed his former servants through intermediaries, piecing together testimony about his previous marriages. I pored over financial records, tracing the payments between Norwood and my uncle that proved their conspiracy. And when we finally had everything, the letters, the testimony, the evidence of murder, I was the one who demanded we confront him directly. Absolutely not, James said when I proposed it. He's dangerous. He tried to destroy me. I want him to see exactly who's destroying him. We argued for an hour. In the end, James relented, but only if I agreed to let him handle the physical confrontation should Norwood become violent. We sent the summons through a mutual acquaintance, a carefully worded invitation suggesting Norwood might wish to discuss a matter of mutual financial interest before certain documents reached the magistrate, his greed, and his desire to assess how much we truly knew. Ensured he would come. On the appointed day, Thornfield's drawing room had been carefully prepared. 2 footmen waited in the adjoining parlor, positioned to enter through the connecting door at James's signal. We would not be caught unprepared. The drawing room at Thornfield felt smaller with Norwood in it. He arrived on a gray November afternoon, his expression a mask of controlled rage. Tall and imposing in his dark coat, his cruel mouth twisted into something that was almost a smile. Lady Amelia, or should I say, Your Grace. His voice dripped contempt. Quite the elevation for a woman who fled her own wedding. I fled a trap, I said, keeping my voice steady. One you set quite deliberately. I don't know what fanciful tales you've told your new husband, but we know about Dr. Bentley. I watched the color drain from his face. We have your letters discussing arrangements for permanent discretion. We have financial records showing payments to my uncle in exchange for my hand. We have testimony from your former servants about the powder you added to your second wife's tea." Norwood's composure cracked. "That servant is lying. They all lie." "Perhaps." James spoke for the first time, his voice deadly quiet. "The courts can decide, along with the curious circumstances of your first wife's death and the convenient timing of both their wills being changed. You can't prove anything. We can prove enough." I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear beginning to creep into his eyes. "Enough to ruin you socially, enough to have you investigated criminally, enough to ensure that no woman of fortune ever accepts your suit again. You'll regret this." His voice had gone thin. "Both of you." "I already have regrets," I said quietly. "I regret that I didn't see through you sooner. I regret that your previous wives didn't have someone to warn them. But I don't regret running, and I don't regret standing here now, watching you realize that you've lost." For a long moment, Norwood stood frozen. Then his face contorted with rage, and he lunged toward me. James intercepted him before he'd taken 2 steps, one arm blocking his charge, the other twisting behind his back. The 2 footmen who'd been waiting in the adjoining parlor rushed through the connecting door to assist. "You should have stayed away, Norwood." I watched as they restrained him, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. "You should have accepted your losses and found another victim. Instead, you're going to prison." "This isn't over," he snarled. "It's been over since the moment I ran." I held his gaze without flinching. "Everything since has just been you refusing to accept it." The authorities took Norwood into custody that same evening, and the formal charges were filed within the week. The trial became the scandal of the following spring. 2 counts of murder, 1 of conspiracy to defraud. The evidence I'd helped gather proved decisive. I attended every day of the proceedings, not because I needed to. James offered to shield me from it, but because I needed to see it through. I needed to watch Norwood's face as witness after witness testified against him. I needed to be there when the verdict was read. Guilty, on all counts. He was sentenced to death for his crimes. Dr. Bentley, named as a co-conspirator in the court documents, had fled to the continent before he could be arrested. The authorities issued a warrant, but he was never seen in England again. My uncle Bernard fled as well before he could be questioned. I never saw him again. Helen lived out her days at Thornfield Hall, beloved by the staff and spoiled shamelessly by both James and me. My sisters visited often, horrified to learn how close they'd come to losing me, grateful beyond words that I'd found safety. And James, my husband, my partner, my unexpected ally, became something I hadn't dared to hope for. It happened slowly. Quiet evenings in the library, our chairs drawn close together, walks in the garden where our hands would brush and neither of us would pull away, conversations that stretched past midnight, revealing fears and dreams and histories we'd kept hidden from everyone else. "I didn't expect this," I told him one evening, nearly a year after our wedding. Our son slept in the nursery above, a child conceived in love, not duty. "When I climbed into your carriage, I thought I was running toward nothing, just escaping into darkness. What did you find instead?" I looked around the library that had become my sanctuary, at the fire crackling in the hearth, at the man who had given me protection and received my heart in return. "Home," I said. "I found home." He kissed me then, properly, thoroughly, and I felt the last remnants of that desperate running girl finally settle into peace, not because I'd found safety in someone else, because I'd discovered strength in myself. Years later, when I look back on that terrified morning when I fled my wedding and climbed into a stranger's carriage, I think about how rarely we can see the shape of our own lives while we're living them. Sometimes the only way to escape a prison is to run toward the unknown. I ran toward a stranger's carriage, toward uncertainty, toward a future I couldn't imagine, and I found something I'd stopped believing existed. Not just safety, not just love, but myself. The person I was always meant to become. If you're trapped right now, if you're looking for a way out, if everyone around you is trying to convince you that their cage is actually a palace, I see you. Your instincts are not wrong. Your fear is valid. And somewhere out there, There's a road waiting for you. Run toward it. You never know what you might find. Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.